Welcome. The theme for this yin practice will be a faint but large constellation seen in the northern sky known as Draco the Dragon. Therefore, the yin postures will have a dragon theme to them. The first posture will be Dragonfly with a little bit of wrist work. And then after that, dragon poses. So I like to call this dragon cycling, and that I'll move through three different variations of dragon. And you can try that too if you wish. And then after that will be both sides of twisted roots pose and both sides of square pose. And there'll be different options and modifications for those. Useful props might be a firm bolster and maybe some blocks. Also, soft padding like blankets, pillows, always a good idea. Gather up what props you think you will need for your versions of the postures. Maybe cultivate your personal intention for practice, and then we'll go ahead and get started. This practice begins in a comfortable meditative seated position. So you can sit cross-legged like I'm sitting. Notice I'm sitting up on this nice firm bolster, but if there's another type of way of sitting that you enjoy more, that's more accessible to you, then try that. This will start off with just a little bit of breath awareness, of true self-awareness. And then a tiny warm-up before we get into the long-held yin postures. So the idea is what I call self-grounding. You're just becoming aware of your own self. Your own physical being is kind of the easiest thing to become aware of first. And we do that by watching an anchor of our physical self, which is our breath. So the idea is soften. Just kind of allow other things to be let go of temporarily. Give yourself permission to be here. Notice your breath, whatever state your breath is in. And then as you notice it, you might notice that since you're kind of setting up for a yoga practice, your breath will soften, it will naturally deepen. And so notice that deepening. Notice the softness. Notice how as you exhale, maybe your belly softens and pulls in, maybe your rib cage relaxes, and then as you inhale, you fill your torso up with air. Your rib cage expands, maybe your belly expands here. And then maybe you continue to slow down here. And this is the practice. It's just notice that, to pay attention to that. What I would also suggest while we're just sitting here quietly at the moment is to notice inner hidden qualities about yourself that are useful to you, but maybe aren't obvious and maybe aren't superficial. In other words, we walk around in normal daily life with kind of this superficial being that you see and everyone else sees in these superficial labels and titles. But that's just a small part of who we really are. And the idea is give yourself permission to take time and notice and remember and think about these more subtle qualities about yourself that actually are useful and helpful to you. And you may not think of them that way. You may think of them, you may actually not like those attributes. That's why they're hidden. Because it's like, well, I don't really want people to know that I'm this way, but it turns out that being this way, doing some certain things actually are helpful and useful to me. And those are the things, I have no idea what they are for you. Those are the things that they're actually trying to pay attention to here, just for a few more breaths. It's like, oh, there's this thing about my true self that's actually useful to me that I don't really pay much attention to and other people really don't know about. now's the time. Now's the time to pay attention to that. And it's a very inner thing. It's a very inner idea or quality or characteristic. So just a couple more breaths here to contemplate that idea. If your eyes were closed, you can gently open up your eyes. Like I said, we'll do a little bit of a more yang type warm up before we get into the long-held yin postures. First exercise is good old cat and cow. So make your way gently onto your hands and to your knees. Make a nice stable table pose on all fours. So if you're not feeling stable, give yourself permission to experiment, to move your hands and your arms, your knees, your legs around until this feels like a stable position. Maybe you need to put padding underneath your knees because your knees are a little bit delicate this morning, and then go ahead and do that. And then start in on this sequence of reaching up into a nice cat, kind of scary cat pose here. And then slowly sink down into a back bend, into cow pose. And then continue to move back and forth. And decide what pace feels nice to you. So it might be faster or slower than I'm doing these. So if this is not the good pace, then find your own pace. We'll do a few cycles of these. I think I'll do 3 or 4 more cycles of this here. And you can match your breath with this. So you can make this a vinyasa. And a vinyasa is you're basically adding kind of a breath cadence to the movement here. So maybe it might be a nice big exhale when you reach up into cat pose, and a nice deep inhale as you reach down into cow pose, or the other way around. Maybe a nice inhale into cat pose, or a nice exhale into cow pose. Maybe one more round of this just to warm up the spine here. And then after your last cow pose, come back to a nice kind of neutral feeling spine. We'll try a shoulder twist here in table pose, shoulder opener here. So root through your right hand and then sweep up with your left hand and your left arm, extend it up to the side, kind of sweep it and lift it up towards the ceiling, just as high as it goes for you. And then slowly bring it back down and weave it in between the right arm and the right knee here. And slowly lower your torso onto your left shoulder here. So you might have to be kind of careful and delicate here until you have the weight of your torso kind of pressing down on that shoulder. Maybe it's pressing down on your head and your neck a little bit. And just notice how this feels. Send your breath into the pressure points, wherever those are manifesting for you. Maybe one more breath here. And then really press up through that right hand. Release the left arm, kind of shake it out. You can raise it up towards the ceiling to kind of open it up. And then bring the left hand back down to the ground. And then the other side here. So root through the left hand and the left arm. Reach out and up. Sweep up with the right arm. Just to open up through the front of the torso and open up that right arm. And then bring it back down and weave it in between the left arm and the left knee and slowly lower yourself down onto that right shoulder. And then just notice the pressure here. If you want to create more of a twist, you can push the left shoulder up some more by pushing the left hand into the ground here. That's only if you want more oomph. If you have enough oomph in this posture, then you're just kind of trying to stay stable here. So one more breath here. And then press through the left hand to reach your torso up. Arm releases and expands up overhead, and then bring the right arm back down. And then from here, we'll start the yin, kind of the yin section here. So the first long held yin posture is called Dragonfly Pose. And I'll incorporate some wrist work into this posture. It's a hip opener with a forward fold. I'm going to demonstrate the posture by sitting up on a firm bolster. You can sit up on a block. You can use you can use a blanket or a pillow. You can use no props whatsoever. You'll start seated, legs extended out front, and then you'll just slowly move your legs apart as far as they go for you. So you make as wide of an angle as you can with your legs here. And the legs are extended. They can maybe be straight if you can straighten them, or maybe the knees are soft and bent to keep it from getting too painful in the bottom of the knees. You can even put soft things under the knees here. And then when you get there, relax the muscles in your legs. That might mean your feet roll in or roll out. That kind of tells you that they're relaxed. Maybe they naturally, for whatever reason, my feet naturally kind of point up towards the ceiling. And that's just me. They don't have to when they're relaxed. They can roll out or they can roll in, depending on the nature of your hip sockets here. The point is to not be in pain or not to be injuring yourself, but going to the place where things stop here. So this is the beginnings of this pose, Dragonfly here. And if it's too intense, bring your legs in closer, bend your knees some more here. But if it is intense but not painful, this is maybe your posture, you stay here. I'm going to include we'll stay here for a few minutes. I'm going to include a little bit of wrist work in this posture. So extend your arms out long. Turn your palms to face up towards the ceiling. Flex your wrists so that your fingers point down towards the ground. And then lower your hands and place the palms of your hands on the floor with your fingers pointed towards your hips. Here, arms are straight and locked here. And then what you do is you slowly rest your torso weight on your arms, on your hands, until you're feeling enough pressure here. If you're feeling too much pressure, a trick is to bring your fingers in closer and then lay your palms down towards the hips. If you're wanting more oomph, move your fingers farther away, your hands farther away, until you're getting enough oomph through the bottoms of your forearms and into your wrists here. And then just enough pressure so that this feels, there's a lot of sensation here. And wrists can be pretty tender, so we're only going to stay in this orientation for probably about 4 more breaths or so. I thought of this because this is yin for the wrists, and if you do a lot of wrist work of some time, the wrist can get worn out. I was staining the bottom of my deck in the back of the house, and so I was spending hours reaching up with a paintbrush, and my wrist got really, really sore doing that for a couple of days. So this is something to help kind of alleviate those overworked tendons that run through the wrist here. So we'll change orientations here. So we'll lift up the hands, keep the fingers on the floor, and then flip the hands over and lay that back of the hands now on the ground. Arms are straight here. And then play around with how much pressure you want to put on the wrists here. Bringing them in closer makes this feel a little bit easier for some people. Taking them out farther makes it feel a little bit more intense, and then you just lower your weight onto your straight arms until you have enough oomph. And then the idea is the yin idea of staying, just allowing the connective tissue that runs through the wrists to feel some nice traction here for a length of time. In this case, we're probably just staying for about a minute in this orientation in the wrists here. So decide what you think of this, and maybe this is too intense. Maybe you have to just skip the wrist work and just concentrate on the hip opener. Otherwise, if it's intense but not harmful, then maybe stay for a couple more breaths here in this orientation. And then at some point, go ahead and lift up. Release your wrists, and the nice counter pose to yin wrist, yin work is to just kind of shake them out here a little bit. we're going to stay in Dragonfly for a little bit longer. And so your options are, you can just sit here with a nice neutral spine, or if you want to spend the last minute or so of time, you can fold forward. And when you fold forward, since this is yin, go ahead and relax and round your spine. Release the muscle fiber in your torso, and you can put props underneath your torso if you need them here. And so we'll just stay here. I'll go through the mechanics of yin here again. So in yin practice, we're trying to relax the muscle fiber so that the traction goes more deeply into the connective tissue system. And we do that with three principles. The first principle is find your edge, find your shape for your body, for a particular posture and intent. And the edge is not a place of pain or harm or injury. The edge is also maybe not a place of absolutely no sensation either. It's a place where you start to feel that resistance, that traction, that pressure for you. And then second principle is called stillness. Cultivate this idea that you're going to actually stay in that position for a while. And then the third principle is you do stay in that position for a while. So a lot longer than maybe in a normal yoga class where we stay in a posture for a minute. We're maybe trying to stay for a little bit longer, for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes here. So just a couple more breaths here in Dragonfly. Now if you folded forward and you're ready to come out, you can use your hands and your arms to push your torso back up, since your torso has maybe got kind of stretched out there in the forward fold. And then maybe work out some of the kinks by doing little movements. I like twists. You can do lateral bends. Maybe your neck needs to be rolled out here a little bit. And then finally the dragonfly legs need to be undone. And you can do this gently. You can even take your hands and move one leg at a time to bring them back out. Bring them back together. A nice counter pose for this is to just have extended legs and just to kind of move your feet around, work the joint of your ankles. So you can do some feet pointing and feet flexing. So point your feet and then you can flex them back and then point them again. So flex, point, flex, point, flex. You can also do circles with your feet, one direction and the other direction. And then we'll go ahead and get set up for the next posture. So the next posture is what I'm going to call dragon cycling. So it's the right and left side of dragon pose. And if there's a certain favorite type of dragon pose that you like the best, you can just stay there. But I'm actually going to cycle through 3 different versions of dragon for the time that gets spent in dragon pose. So we'll go ahead and move into one side of dragon, come onto hands and knees, and then bring the left foot up in between your hands into the right knee back. You might want to put some padding under that right knee if it's tender, or the right ankle here. This is basic dragon. This basic low lunge is dragon pose. And this is where we'll stay for the first minute or so of dragon cycling, and then we'll move through high flying and low flying dragon each for a minute here. Now if dragon doesn't work for you, any version of it, you can always do upside down dragon. And upside down dragon is when you roll onto your back, right leg's extended, bring the left knee in, maybe raise the left foot up towards the ceiling, clasp the left foot with your hands, and let the left knee kind of drift down towards the floor on the outside of your left rib cage here. And you can just stay here with inverted dragon here. And maybe you'll do that for the full amount of time. Otherwise, if you're in dragon pose, we'll stay here for maybe about 3 more breaths here. Now, if you like this pose and want to stay here, give yourself permission to stay. Otherwise, if you're wanting to follow along, we're going to move into high flying dragon next. And that just means we're lifting the torso up here. So 1 more breath here, and then maybe on an inhale, use the inhale to lift your torso up into high flying dragon. So this next version of the low lunge is called high flying dragon. And when you lifted your torso up, the sensations might have changed. I don't know exactly how they changed for you. Typically, I think what a lot of people feel is there's more traction in this back, in the back leg here. There's more traction in the thigh and in the psoas here. This is a little bit of a balancing posture, because if you realize it's kind of a yin-yang posture, we're trying to, this is a hip opener. We're trying to keep the muscles in the hip soft so that the traction goes into the connective tissue. But you probably notice that there's micro muscles in your feet, in your lower legs, that are trying to keep you just balanced here. Which is why we're only going to stay here for about a minute or so, is to just get that extra stretch from high flying dragon. This is, for a lot of people, much more intense posture here. So about 3 more breaths here. And then we'll change again. Now if you like this pose, you can stay here. Otherwise you can go back to basic dragon. But what we're going to do is now we'll cycle from this pose to low flying, what I call low flying dragon. So slowly make your way back into basic dragon. So you lower your torso, hands come back to the floor. Feet moves out, so the left foot moves out to the left a little bit, and you sweep the left arm on the inside. So this is already low flying dragon, and you can stay here. But if you want to, you can try to lower yourself down onto your forearms. And then from here, you stay for another minute or so. If you're not liking this pose, then maybe back up into another favorite dragon pose. So we're moving through these because I'm going to talk about constellation, an area of sky that is very close to the North Celestial Pole. So it's not the Little Dipper. And in fact, it's one of the fainter constellations in the northern sky, which is why it's not very well known. It's surrounded by very well-known bright constellations. So I often say that, the way to get to know these fainter constellations is you talk a lot about the brighter constellations that are around them. So the constellation Draco is in the same area of the sky as the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. Ursa Major and Ursa Minor are the Big and Little Bears, or the Big and Little Dippers, that are very famous ancient constellations that probably, if you know anything about the northern sky, you've probably been told about the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, particularly because the Big Dipper is bright and the Little Dipper has a very important star, the North Star, Polaris, in the Little Dipper. And Draco actually weaves itself in between both of those famous constellations. So we're getting done with dragon pose, whatever your version of it is. So maybe slowly come back to dragon for a moment. And then the counter pose to this pose will be to just kind of shift your hips back and extend the front leg as much as it will extend. Maybe flex the foot until you're feeling some oomph in the back of this leg. And then just kind of round and bend over that front leg just for a moment. And then go ahead and release, come out, maybe come back to table. There's other kind of release motions that you need to do, then do those, because we have the whole other side of dragon cycling now to do here. So back to hands and knees. And now it's the other foot. Right foot is in front, left knee back. Maybe it's upside down dragon if this is not working. So this is basic dragon here, and we'll spend the first minute here in basic dragon. And then we'll cycle into high flying dragon and then into low flying dragon. So back to the dragon constellation in the sky here. Again, this is a very northern constellation, so unfortunately for folks that live in the southern hemisphere, this is a constellation that you cannot see. That's okay, it's kind of a faint constellation anyway. There's no big, bright, famous asterisms of stars in this constellation. It's kind of the faintness in between other more famous constellations. I mentioned the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper in the North Star, and this is a constellation of an area of sky that weaves its way in between those. It's also next to Hercules, which is a very famous constellation from Greek mythology. It has a little bit brighter stars in it too. It's also very near the Summer Triangle, which has very, very bright stars in it. And it's also near the constellation Cassiopeia, which also has very bright stars in it. Because of all of this, it's an easy area of sky to find. It's just there's not a lot there to see, although there are visible stars in the constellation, and I'll talk about a few of them. So one more breath here in basic dragon, and we're lifting up into high flying dragon. So maybe on an inhale, gather your balance and lift your torso up. Kind of try to move it away from this front thigh. And then you can notice I use my hands to kind of stabilize myself by kind of wrapping around the front thigh. But there's all kinds of different things you can do with your hands. Your hands can just arms can just kind of hang here. And then kind of just ooze into this posture, into high flying dragon for about another minute here or so. Check in with your breath, check in with your sensations. So we're doing kind of dueling attentions. We're paying attention to how our body is feeling about these postures. And then we're paying attention to something bigger in the world, the stars in the sky above us, particularly the sky that's hidden, the sky that's not so bright, the sky that's not so famous. And in this case, it's the constellation Draco. Constellation Draco, the dragon that weaves its way in between the Big Bear and the Little Bear, the North Star and Hercules, and the Summer Triangle and Lyra. One easy way to find the head of the dragon, if you will, the head of the constellation, is to find the very bright star Vega. Vega is in the constellation Lyra. And if you can find Vega, Vega is one of the brightest stars in all of the night sky. It's also a northern star here. Then you're pretty close to finding the area of sky that has kind of what's considered the head of Draco here. So if you are familiar with that star, and if you're familiar with where the North Star is, then the head of the dragon is right in between those two areas. So if you're looking at the fainter stars in that area of the night sky, you're looking directly at Draco. So now we're moving into low flying dragon. So come back to basic dragon. Move the right foot out to the right a little bit, and then sweep the right arm on the inside of the right foot. This can be your low flying dragon, or you can come down onto your forearms. And then we'll just stay here for a few final breaths here in low flying dragon. Now you can't see the stars in Draco. They're just no brilliant first magnitude stars. There are some second magnitude stars. And one of the asterisms in Draco is a trapezoidal area of sky made up of 4 stars, and 2 of the brighter stars are in that trapezoid. And that's called the head of the dragon here. And so I'll talk a little bit about those 2 bright stars. The 2 brightest stars, one is called Eltanen, and the other one is called Rastaban. The bright one is Eltanen, and it literally means the serpent or the dragon. That's the meaning of that name. And it's the brightest star in Draco. It's actually a star it's an orange giant star. It's an orange giant star that's just a little bit bigger than the sun. It has maybe about twice the mass of the sun. And it's about 150 light years away from the sun right now. And so it's second, we can see it as second magnitude, partly because it's bright, partly because it's relatively close. And it's heading in our direction. So in a million years from now, it'll only be 28 light years away, and it'll actually be the brightest star in the sky when it gets that close. It'll be brighter than Sirius. Slowly come out of low-flying dragon here. And then same counter pose on this side. So shift your hips back, straighten and extend the front leg as much as possible, and then slowly bend over that front leg. Hands are kind of on either side for stability here on the floor here. You just stay here for a breath or two. This is just a counter pose. And then slowly begin to bring yourself out, and got through the dragon cycles there. So we survived the dragon here. So from here, we'll move into twisted roots, the first side of twisted roots, which is a reclined twist pose. So make your way onto your back. When you get there, bend your knees, put your feet on the floor here. And then for twisted roots, we make the twisted roots legs, which are basically bring the right thigh and right knee closer to your torso. Wrap the right thigh around the left thigh. And maybe lift the left thigh up here a little bit, make this kind of wrapping. For some of you, you'll be able to continue to wrap this right foot around the left shin. I can't do that, so this is as far as I go for twisted roots. And then we'll lower all the legs over to the left side. So you might have to shift your hips to the right a little bit, and then lower all of this to the right, left, or to the left. Right shoulder's trying to stay close to the ground so that you're in a spinal twist. So if you ended up on the side of your torso, allow your upper body to roll back to the right so that you're in a spinal twist here. You might need to put some props underneath your knees if they didn't make it to the ground. My knees float, but it's okay if they float here because I don't feel any pain here. You can bring your right arm out, either T or cactus arm position for an outrigger here. And then head and neck can be in a neutral position, or you can turn your head and neck to look out over that right arm here. If the twisted root legs are causing you too much difficulty, maybe untwist the roots and just do the twisted roots with legs parallel to each other is a nice alternative here. And then we'll stay here for a few minutes. So the other bright star in the head of the dragon is a star known as Thuban. And that's about the same brightness as Eltanen. It's a different kind of a star, so it's twice as far, actually it's more than twice as far away. It's instead of 150 light years, Thuban is 380 light years away from us. And it's a giant yellow star. It's about 6 times more massive than our sun is, and about 1,000 times brighter than the sun. But because it's so much farther away, it appears to be just about as bright as Eltanen. So if you look at both of those stars, they're about the same. They're about the same brightness, and they're the two brightest stars. They're second magnitude stars. So they're probably the first stars that pop out and that you can actually see in this much fainter constellation here. So those are the two brightest stars. The other star I'd like to talk about in Draco is the star Thuban. Now Thuban is down in the tail end of the constellation, if you will. And the name Thuban also means serpent or dragon as well, which is what a lot of the stars in the constellation actually means. They're all meant to symbolize a dragon. Thuban
is not very bright. It's only a third magnitude star, so it's you can see it with the naked eye, but it's not very distinguishable from a lot of the other just faint stars in the night sky. Thuban is an important star, though, because thousands of years ago, Thuban used to be at the North Pole, at the North Celestial Pole. It used to be the pole star rather than Polaris, because the Earth precesses on its axis. In fact, Thuban was close to the North Celestial Pole about 5,000 years ago, 4 to 5,000 years ago, when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. They were using Thuban as the north direction, and in fact, when they designed the pyramids, there's passageways in the Great Pyramid that actually lead up to and point to the North Celestial Pole, where Thuban was. So a lot of the astronomical alignment of the pyramids wasn't at Polaris. They were aligned to the star Thuban, which back 4,000 years ago. And then Thuban drifted away and Polaris became the new pole star here. A couple more breaths here. And then when you're ready, you'll go ahead and lift your knees back up to center. Uncross your legs if you have them crossed here. And then the counter pose I would suggest here is just waterfall pose. Extend your legs up towards the ceiling, maybe hands behind your thighs here. And you can, if you want to, you can do that same kind of point and flex with your feet, or feet circles here, just for a moment to extend the legs and to work out the stagnation that developed. And then we'll get set up for the other side of the spinal twist. So twisted roots on the other side, either legs, knees bent, legs either parallel or the twisted root leg. So this time reach the left knee up and wrap the left thigh around the right thigh here. Make your version of twisted roots here. And then slowly lower all those knees and legs over to the right side. Left arm reaches out to the left shoulder oozes back towards the floor here. Head is either in a neutral position, or you can, if you want a complete twist, you turn your head to gaze out along this left arm here. And again, use props as needed. So I have a nice handy bolster here. If I want my knees and legs to feel more stable, I can stuff that bolster underneath my legs, and then I have something sturdy that my legs can rest on. If your knees reach the floor, then you don't need a bolster here. They can also just float in midair. And then we'll settle here. We'll settle here for a few more minutes or so. So one of the astronomical claims to fame of the Draco constellation is, so Earth has this precession where where its celestial axis of rotation points drifts every 26,000 years in a big circle. And right now, the axis is pointing right at Polaris in the Little Dipper. 5,000 years ago, it pointed at Thuban. And sometime in the future, it'll point at the bright star Vega. But that whole big circle that it makes, that has a center to the circle. And the center, known as the center of precession, exists in the constellation Draco. So it's called, Draco is called, because of that, it's actually called the elliptical North Pole. It's actually the center pointing pole of the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, rather than the rotational axis of the Earth. And it's right smack dab in the middle of this big faint constellation known as Draco. There's actually something there. You can't see it with the naked eye. There's a very beautiful object near that point, right in the middle of the constellation, known as the Cat's Eye Nebula. Now, unfortunately, it's 9th magnitude, so you can't see it with the naked eye. You can barely see it with small telescopes. But when you look at it with large telescopes, say the Hubble Space Telescope, the Cat's Eye Nebula is this beautiful, beautiful planetary nebula that's all kinds of different colors. It's basically, I think they believe it's a couple of old stars that are throwing off outer layers of their atmosphere over thousands of years, and they produce, and then that gas gets excited by the starlight and produces these beautiful colors, which is very characteristic of a nebula. And so it's become a famous nebula, even though it's very faint and hard to see. And that is one of the few interesting objects that is in the constellation. There's also several galaxies. So there's a galaxy known as M102. There's the Tadpole galaxy, which is a spiral galaxy that has a long tail. It looks like a tadpole here. So about 5 more breaths on this side here. So that's the actual astronomical stuff that's in that general area of sky. But the reason why it's called a dragon comes from Greek mythology. So when the constellation, when the Greeks decided to kind of create and divide up the sky into constellations, that part of the sky was named dragon because the Greeks had several stories about dragons in their mythology, even though the idea that that's part of the sky was a dragon predates the Greeks, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Slowly bring yourself out of twisted roots on this side. Lift your knees up. Untwist your knees. And again, whatever kind of gentle motion you need to do, I'm doing the waterfall thing again here for the counter pose. And if there's something else you think that will work out the kinks, then try that for a moment. And then roll over gently to one side, bring yourself up. The next in posture is both sides of square pose. Square pose can be very specific to how the makeup of one's hip bones, so it's sometimes not a posture that fits everyone. So I'll offer a few alternatives. Actually, for square pose, I kind of like not having any sitting on any padding. You start out seated, legs out in front for square pose. Bend the left knee and draw the left shin kind of perpendicular in front of you, so it's crossways in front of you. And then bend the right knee, and for square pose, what you're trying to do is roughly stack your right shin on top of your left shin. So your right ankle's on top of your left knee, right knee is above your left ankle. And they don't have to touch. So notice mine don't touch, but if there's achiness or pain underneath the knees or the ankles, then always kind of mitigate that with some prop or padding here. You can put some padding. If it's this knee, that's an issue. Maybe it's this knee. So you put the padding under there. This doesn't have to be perfect, so you can experiment with moving the foot around a little bit to find a better pressure point. For some of us, we just can't get into this posture. So you can try shoelace. Shoelace is to stack the knees. You might be able to, this might be more accommodating or maybe less accommodating for you. So you can do shoelace if square pose is not available. You can also do eye of the needle. So if neither one of these works for you, make your way onto your back. Both knees are bent. And then put the right ankle on the left thigh. Right knee is bent and out wide, and you can just stay here with the foot on the ground or bring the knee in until you're feeling something here, and then you stay here. So those are different families of alternatives for this hip opener known as square pose. You can stay here just seated upright, or the next stage is to add a rounded forward fold to this. Any amount. Maybe you only go a little bit. Maybe you go a little bit more here. So you're trying to find your stopping point. The spine is rounded, the muscles in the torso are relaxed, and then we'll stay here for a couple more minutes or so. So there's several mythological stories that come from Greek mythology that are associated with Draco the dragon. The Greeks had a lot of stories for dragons, so there's probably a dozen different stories of different dragons from different eras in Greek mythology
that are kind of associated with a constellation. The most famous and common is the myth of Hercules. So Hercules was a Greek hero who had what were called the 12 labors. He had to go around and do different things. One of them was to kill a lion, and that lion is represented by the constellation Leo. Another labor that he had is he had to go steal some apples from a grove, some golden apples, and the golden apples were guarded by a dragon. And so Hercules had to vanquish the dragon in order to get at the apples. And that dragon that he vanquished is represented by Draco, the constellation. Notice that Draco is right next to the Hercules constellation in the sky. There's also other tales. One tale is there used to be this big battle between gigantic monsters and the Olympian gods, and it turned out that the goddess Athena vanquished one of the monsters, which was a dragon. And as she vanquished the dragon, she threw the dragon up into the sky, and that became Draco the dragon. So this was a battle between a dragon and the goddess Athena here. There's other stories as well. The constellation was probably associated with the dragon long before the Greeks. It's a constellation from antiquity, because there's also there's a creation myth from the Babylonian civilization that existed before the Greeks. And they have a tale of a great battle between their god of the sun and a creature of the earth, a gigantic earth guardian known as Tiamat. Tiamat was this just dragon, and there's a table from ancient Babylon of the god of the sun vanquishing the earth dragon, Tiamat, and it's believed that that dragon is represented in Draco the dragon here. So maybe 3 more breaths here on this side of square pose, or shoelace, or eye of the needle, or whatever you found that works for you here. When you're ready, slowly bring yourself up. And then undo your square pose. And then if there's any kind of wiggling around you need to do, then go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and demonstrate the other side of square pose. So left leg was on the bottom first time. So now it's the right leg. So bend the right knee, bring the right shin in front of you, crossways in front of you, and then stack the left shin on top here. See if this fits. Maybe you need padding or something underneath one or both knees here. I actually like to shift and reset my sits bones when I do this posture here. If this is not working, you've got shoelace, you've got eye of the needle on this side that you can try. So in other words, don't worry too much about the pose. Find the pose that fits your body. That's more important here. And then you can either stay with a nice neutral spine or fold forward any amount. By the way, if you only fold a little bit and you're stopped, and you want some support and you have a nice firm bolster like this, you can just rest here on the bolster. And then we'll stay here. Another few minutes. So a good time to check in with your breath and your sensation and make sure you have found your edge in this posture. And then breathe into that. Breathe into the stuck places, the places of pressure, the places of traction here, to just kind of calm them down. So the dragon is well represented as this constellation because, like I said, it's a very large but faint constellation. So if you look at the night sky and the north sky, you're probably attracted to the brighter, more famous constellations around it that that's really good metaphor. So we get distracted by the Big Dipper and all the bright stars and the Big Dipper. We focus on the North Star because the Polaris, because it's such an important star, and the Little Dipper. We maybe are trying to find Hercules because we like this idea of this strong, famous hero from Greek mythology, this bright constellation. So we're looking for all the bright stuff around it, even though what's characteristic about Draco is it's this big, vast part of space and sky that's very important to be there. It has to be there to hold space for all the other bright stuff around it. And therefore, and it's hidden, it's dark, but it's useful to be there. And indeed, the dragon is a great metaphor for all the dark hidden things that are useful to us. And it's that metaphor is emblazoned in how the constellations were made in the northern sky. And the Greeks basically set it in place. Now, that's just the interpretation by one human civilization. Other human civilizations looked at stars and saw other things. Because Draco the Dragon is a faint constellation, it's not terribly well known or famous in other cultures. Other cultures were spending their time just trying to tell stories about the bright things they saw, or the very dark holes. If you're from Australian native culture, they were interested in the dark, in tiny dark places where they couldn't see any stars here. But in one tradition, in one Native American tradition in North America, the fainter stars in the region of Draco were not seen as a dragon. It was actually seen as a thunderbird. So in their tradition, they saw the North Star Polaris as, they just called it the star that doesn't move, because that's with a pole star, that's a characteristic of pole star. It actually doesn't appear to move as the Earth rotates. But they saw the collection of stars next to the star that doesn't move as a great bird that kind of circles that spot, that's kind of watching over everyone as a symbol of power. And to the Native Americans, that symbol of power was the thunderbird. So the Draco constellation, in that tradition, was actually not a dragon, but a great bird of power, because it was of thunder, and it was a bird of thunder and lightning here. So just one more breath here. And then you can start to make your way out of this side of square pose. You can lean back and release your legs. You can extend them out. So the integration in the counter pose before resting pose is kind of a reclined windshield wiper type maneuver. So go ahead and make your way onto your back. Bend your knees. Place your feet on the floor and then bring your feet out wide so they move away from each other. Maybe find that if you're using a yoga mat, you find each edge of your yoga mat with your feet. And then start off this integration by just slowly lowering your knees to one side. Bring them back up to center, lower them to the other side, and then bring them back up to center. Do this windshield wiper movement a few times here. And then the next time your knees reach the ground, pause there. So just stay in that orientation and stay here for a couple breaths, or you can even take the inner foot and place it on the outside of the inner thigh. And just hold this for maybe another breath or so. And then put the foot back down. Bring the knees up. Slowly lower them to the other side. Let them stay there. You can just stay here for a few breaths, or you can take the inner foot, place it on top of the inner thigh, just for a little bit of added traction here. And then release, bring the knees back up. And then a little bit of free form yoga.
So any kind of things that strikes you as what you would like to do to kind of work out any imbalances or kinks of the practice here. Allow yourself some time to reverberate and then move yourself into your resting pose. So I'm going to just practice traditional Shavasana here, which is just lying on the floor, arms and legs comfortably extended and a comfortable distance away from each other here. Head and neck, torso is neutral. You can take some time to just soften and let your body kind of melt into the floor. And you notice those connection points that your body makes with the floor. And then maybe you decide you need some props because things are a little bit too unstable or uncomfortable. So maybe there's a prop underneath the knees, maybe there's a pillow underneath the head, maybe it's chilly in the room that you're practicing in, so you put on clothing and kind of cover yourself with a blanket. Make this your resting posture, a posture that you feel safe and stable enough in that you can actually rest and relax. It's the whole point to this posture here. So if you don't feel very restful and relaxed, it probably means you need to find a different posture here. Maybe some just quiet meditation, like sitting in a meditation posture is a good thing. Because we're going to go back to that original idea at the beginning of practice. Once you're settled here, once you soften, once you've kind of come back to notice your breath again, come back to this exercise of thinking about your own characteristics of your true self, your whole self. And the practice is see if you can come up with, notice, and appreciate those aspects of your being, of your true self, that are useful and helpful to you, but they're not overt. They're kind of hidden, covert, dark, faint aspects of yourself. That again, maybe you take them for granted, maybe you don't even like them. They are useful. They are useful to you. They are truly part of who you are. And maybe at some point, instead of keeping them hidden, you'll actually learn to appreciate those aspects and create a sense of gratitude for those aspects. At some point, bring yourself back. Maybe begin to deepen your breath and start to make little motions. Maybe wiggle fingers, and wiggle toes. And maybe begin to move hands, feet, and then legs and arms. Maybe head and neck start to gently move around. At some point, slowly bend your knees, roll over onto one side. When you get there, Stay there for a moment. Stay there long enough to give yourself a big thank you for your practice and your efforts, but also a big thank you for you, your unique embodiment, and your unique dragons in the world. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you're here. When you're ready, slowly bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. When you've established that seat, bring your hands together in front of your heart center, and I'll end practice with an Om. The inner starlight in me honors the inner starlight in you. Namaste.